The late September air in Concord, Massachusetts, carries a specific kind of chill. It's the kind that doesn't make you shiver, but rather wakes you up, sharpening the edges of everything around you. I stood on the flagstone patio of the historic estate I had rented for the evening, wrapping my cashmere shawl a little tighter around my shoulders. I am 38 years old, and tonight I am hosting my daughter's engagement party. When you have a child at 17, the math of your life always startles people. They look at Chloe and me and assume we are sisters. They don't see the years I spent working double shifts at a diner while finishing high school online, or the countless nights I slept on the floor of my first tiny flower shop, surrounded by buckets of dying hydrangeas, just to make sure Chloe had the money for ballet lessons. We didn't just grow up together. We survived together. And looking at her now, standing under the canopy of fairy lights I had meticulously strung through the ancient oak trees, I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of victory. Chloe was 21, radiant in a simple ivory silk slip dress. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a flute of champagne held loosely in her hand. She was untouched by the harshness of the world I had fought so hard to shield her from. Beside her stood Julian. Julian was 28, the director of a prestigious contemporary art gallery in downtown Boston. He was, by all conventional metrics, flawless. He wore a navy bespoke suit that draped perfectly across his shoulders. He had the kind of effortless old money charm that made people lean in when he spoke. I took a sip of my wine. It tasted metallic. My business was built on noticing what others missed. I once stopped a 400-person wedding reception from turning into a disaster just because the imported lilies didn't smell quite right. They were high-grade fakes, mixed in by a corner-cutting vendor. I make my living by spotting the one artificial thing in a room full of beauty. And for the past 6 months, a quiet, persistent hum in the back of my mind had been telling me that Julian was artificial. It wasn't anything obvious. He was impeccably polite to me, but there was a suffocating quality to his affection. Earlier this evening, when Chloe had been telling a lively story about her childhood, he had reached out and smoothly tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. It looked breathtakingly romantic to the crowd, but the gesture had effectively stopped her mid-sentence, shifting the spotlight back to him. He didn't seem to love her so much as he seemed to be curating her, the way he would a new exhibit at his gallery. "You're just being a protective mother," I told myself, repeating the mantra I had used since they started dating. "You built your whole life around her, and now you have to let her go. Don't be that cliché." "Elena, the catering staff needs you in the kitchen." I blinked, pulling myself out of my thoughts. It was one of my assistant coordinators. I nodded, plastered on my professional smile, and navigated my way through the crowd of 60 guests. I exchanged pleasantries, kissed cheeks, and accepted congratulations on my future son-in-law. The estate was a sprawling, Gilded Age mansion. To get to the catering kitchen, you had to pass through a long, dimly lit library that ran along the east wing of the house. It was supposed to be off-limits to guests. The heavy mahogany doors were shut, but as I walked past, I noticed one was slightly ajar. A sliver of yellow light spilled onto the Persian rug in the hallway, and then I heard the voice. It was sharp, agitated. "Look, man, I don't care what your timeline is. You told me 3 hours. I've been playing your buddy for 3 hours." I stopped. The heavy bass of the jazz band outside suddenly felt very far away. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I recognized the voice. It was Marcus. Julian had introduced him to us an hour ago as his best friend from his undergrad days at Yale. They had shared an elaborate, laughing embrace. Marcus had even given a charming, self-deprecating toast about how Julian was always the responsible one who kept him out of trouble. I pressed my back against the cool plaster of the hallway wall and inched closer to the crack in the door. I held my breath. "I don't give a damn if the cake hasn't been cut," Marcus hissed into his phone. He was pacing. I could hear the squeak of his leather shoes on the hardwood floor. "My rate is my rate. You promised the remaining $500 via Venmo by 9 o'clock. It is 9:15. A pause. Whoever was on the other end, Julian, it had to be Julian, was speaking. "Don't give me that," Marcus scoffed, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. I memorized the backstory. I smiled at the kid. I even hugged her scary, over-observant mother. I did exactly what you hired me to do. But I am an actor, not a charity. You wire the money right now, or I walk out there, grab a microphone, and tell your sweet little fiancé that I met you on a casting website last Tuesday. The air in my lungs turned to ice. The words didn't make sense. They tumbled over each other in my mind. Hired me to do. Casting website. I am an actor. Why would a successful gallery director need to hire a fake best friend for his own engagement party? And then, a memory from earlier in the evening hit me like a physical blow. Chloe had been giving her toast, and she had playfully teased Julian about his embarrassing middle name, Bartholomew. I had looked over at his table of lifelong friends, expecting them to laugh or groan. They hadn't. They had just smiled, empty and polite, waiting for their cue. They hadn't known what she was talking about. Another pause from inside the room. Then Marcus let out a short, cynical laugh. Yeah, that's what I thought. Pleasure doing business with you, man. Good luck with the performance. I heard the beep of a phone disconnecting, followed by the sound of footsteps heading toward the door. Instinct took over. I didn't think. I just moved. I slipped away from the door, my heels entirely silent on the hallway runner, and ducked into the alcove beneath the main staircase just as the library door swung open. Marcus stepped out. He was adjusting his tie, checking his phone screen. The warm, jovial college buddy persona had completely vanished. His face was slack, bored, and intensely transactional. He slipped his phone into his pocket and walked back out toward the garden, stepping seamlessly back into the bright lights and the laughter. I stayed in the shadows of the alcove for a long time. My hands were shaking. I looked down at them, the hands that had arranged thousands of wedding bouquets, the hands that had braided Chloe's hair, the hands that had built an empire from nothing. They were trembling uncontrollably. A normal person might have marched out there, stopped the music, and demanded answers. A normal person might have pulled their daughter aside and caused a scene. But I am not a normal person. I am a mother who has spent her entire life scanning the horizon for threats to her child. And right now, the threat wasn't on the horizon. It was standing in the center of the garden, holding a glass of champagne, with its arm wrapped tightly around my daughter's waist. If Julian was lying about something as fundamental as the people in his life, he wasn't just hiding a secret. He was constructing a reality. And men who build fake realities around young women do not do it because they are in love. They do it because they want a cage. I took a deep, shuddering breath, inhaling the scent of the pine needles and the expensive catering. I forced my hands to stop shaking. I smoothed the front of my dress. When I walked back out onto the patio, the jazz band was playing a slow, romantic standard. Chloe was resting her head on Julian's shoulder. He was looking down at her, the perfect picture of devotion. I didn't cause a scene. I smiled at the catering staff. I picked up a fresh glass of wine. I watched the man my daughter was going to marry, and I made a silent, unbreakable promise. You think you're directing this play, Julian, I thought, letting the coldness settle deep into my bones. But you just forgot who owns the theater. Sunday morning arrived with a headache that had nothing to do with the wine. The kitchen of our townhouse smelled of stale jasmine and eucalyptus, leftover centerpieces I had mindlessly hauled home from the estate. Chloe was sitting at the marble island, wearing one of Julian's oversized gray cashmere sweaters. She was humming softly, scrolling through photos from the night before, her thumb pausing every few seconds to admire the diamond glittering on her left hand. I set a mug of black coffee in front of her. My chest felt hollow, lined with broken glass. It was a beautiful night, sweetie, I said, keeping my voice light, carefully measuring the exact dose of maternal warmth. Though it's a shame Julian's friends had to leave so abruptly. I barely got to say goodbye to Marcus. Chloe didn't look up from her phone. Oh, Julian warned me that might happen. Marcus gets easily overwhelmed in large crowds. I froze, the French press still in my hand. Overwhelmed? Yeah. She took a sip of her coffee, completely relaxed. Julian told me about it a few months ago. Marcus had a really rough childhood, kind of bounced around foster homes. He has severe social anxiety. Julian actually helped pay for his therapy last year. He said Marcus only came last night because he wanted to support him, but large events are triggers for him. I stared at the back of my daughter's head. He had laid the groundwork. Julian hadn't just hired an actor. He had crafted an entire airtight backstory to preemptively explain any awkwardness, any lack of shared history, any sudden departures. He had weaponized Chloe's natural empathy, turning a glaring red flag into a testament to his own generosity. Julian is so kind to his damaged friends. That's very compassionate of him, I managed to say, the words tasting like ash. Chloe finally looked up, catching a flicker of something in my eyes. Her smile tightened slightly, taking on a defensive edge I was starting to see more and more lately. He is compassionate, Mom. I know you think he's a bit stiff, but he's actually incredibly thoughtful once you get past the surface. You just have to stop analyzing him like one of your catering vendors. The rebuke stung, sharp and precise. I nodded, forcing a smile, and turned to the sink. I didn't argue. Arguing with a girl who is high on the adrenaline of a new engagement is like trying to put out a grease fire with a glass of water. It only makes the flames leap higher. If I was going to pull my daughter out of this, I needed proof, not intuition. On Monday morning, I locked the door to my office at Elena's events. I ignored the stack of floral invoices on my desk and opened my laptop. I didn't hire a private investigator. In my line of work, you don't need to. Event planners are practically private investigators with better taste in linen. We know how to track down a flaky cellist across 3 state lines. Finding a local actor wouldn't be much harder. I opened the database for New England Casting, a portal I sometimes use to hire promotional models for high-end corporate galas. I set the filters. Male, 25 to 35, Caucasian, Boston area, theatrical/commercial. It took me 3 hours of scrolling through hundreds of headshots. My eyes burned. And then, on page 14, a face stopped me dead. The profile name was Marcus Thorne. The headshot showed him in a casual denim jacket, flashing that same jovial, effortless smile he had given me when he shook my hand. His resume listed a few local theater productions and an extra role in a true crime reenactment show. At the bottom, a bolded line read, "Available for corporate role play, event hosting, and immersive character work. Rate, $150 per hour." I printed the page. The whirring of the printer sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet office. So he was fake. But why? Was Julian completely broke? Was the gallery director persona a sham to get his hands on the modest trust fund I had set up for Chloe? It was a substantial amount of money, enough to buy a house in a good neighborhood, but it wasn't private jet wealth. If he was a con artist after money, why play such an intricate, slow game? I needed to see his financials. I needed to get into his computer. The opportunity presented itself on Thursday evening. I drove to Julian's minimalist loft in the Seaport district under the guise of dropping off some silk ribbon samples for the invitations. Chloe was at her hot yoga class. I knew she wouldn't be back for another hour. Julian opened the door. He was wearing dark slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked surprised, and beneath the surprise, a flash of pure irritation that he quickly smothered with his trademark charming smile. "Elena, what a lovely surprise," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "I know, I should have called," I said breezily, walking past him into the immaculate, cold apartment. "I just had a meeting a few blocks away and wanted to drop these off. I'm actually just finishing up a grant proposal for the gallery," he said, gesturing to the kitchen island where his sleek silver MacBook sat open, the screen brightly lit. "I'll be out of your hair in 2 minutes," I promised. "Could I just trouble you for a glass of water? Traffic on the I-93 was brutal." "Of course." He turned around to get a glass from the cabinet, stepping toward the built-in refrigerator. In that exact moment, his cell phone, resting on the coffee table in the living area, began to buzz loudly. He glanced at the caller ID, his jaw tightening. "I actually have to take this," he muttered. "Excuse me for one moment, Elena." He grabbed the phone and slid the heavy glass door open, stepping out onto the balcony. The thick, soundproof glass slid shut behind him. He was pacing, his back to the room, gesturing aggressively with his free hand. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had perhaps 60 seconds. I stepped to the kitchen island. I didn't touch the mouse. That would leave fingerprints or move the cursor from where he left it. I just leaned over, my eyes scanning the open screen. He wasn't working on a grant proposal. He had an application open. Notion, a productivity and organizing workspace. The sidebar was populated with various folders. Most were mundane. Gallery finances, auto loan, workout schedule. But my eyes locked onto a folder pinned to the very top. It was simply titled, Project C, Chloe. I reached out, my finger trembling, and lightly tapped the trackpad to open the folder. The screen shifted. There were no bank account numbers, no spreadsheets calculating my daughter's net worth. Instead, it was a meticulously detailed psychological matrix. It was divided into columns: target area, current status, action required, timeline. I stopped breathing. I read the first row. Target area, friendships, Mia. Current status, high influence. Mia is perceptive and protective. Action required, subtly highlight Mia's recent career struggles to Chloe. Frame Mia's advice as jealousy. Timeline, isolate by Thanksgiving. My stomach heaved. I forced my eyes down to the next row. Target area, career. Current status, enjoys marketing job. Dangerously independent. Action required, encourage quitting. Offer a part-time consultancy at the gallery to manage her hours. Make her financially reliant on my accounts. Timeline, before the wedding. A cold sweat broke out across my back. This wasn't a man trying to steal a trust fund. This was a predator documenting the domestication of his prey. He was systematically dismantling Chloe's support system, her independence, her reality. I scrolled down one more line. Target area, Elena, mother. Current status, highly enmeshed, critical threat level. Action required, weaponize her teen pregnancy trauma. Chloe feels guilty for her mother's sacrifices. Flip the narrative. Frame Elena's protectiveness as toxic, narcissistic control. Trigger abandonment issues. Timeline. Initiate conflict by month 8. Sever contact by month 10. I felt the blood drain from my face. He wasn't just planning to marry her. He was planning to erase me from her life completely. And he was treating it like a corporate project, checking off boxes as he slowly suffocated my daughter's freedom. Through the glass door, I saw Julian turn around. He was ending the call. I desperately tapped the trackpad to close the Project C folder, returning the screen to the generic dashboard he had left open. I snatched my hand back just as the balcony door slid open, letting in the roar of the city traffic. "Sorry about that," Julian said, his voice smooth and untroubled as he walked back into the kitchen. He handed me a glass of iced water. His eyes flicked to the laptop screen, then back to my face. He smiled. "Gallery drama. You know how it is." I took the glass. The ice clinked against the sides, betraying the violent shaking of my hands. I looked into the eyes of the man who was planning to psychologically vivisect my daughter. I saw the absolute, terrifying emptiness behind them. "I know exactly how it is, Julian," I said softly. I walked out of that apartment knowing that if I made one wrong move, if I told Chloe what I saw without bulletproof evidence, he would execute the final step of his plan. He would frame me as a crazy, jealous mother, and I would lose her forever. I was officially in a war. And the enemy had already drawn the battle lines inside my daughter's mind. It took me 3 days to build my case. 3 days of functioning on black coffee and adrenaline, moving through the motions of my life like a ghost. At the floral shop, my staff asked if I was coming down with the flu. My skin was drawn, pale, and my hands carried a perpetual, faint tremor. Every time my phone buzzed with a text from Chloe, "Found the perfect shoes for the rehearsal dinner," or "Julian booked our honeymoon to Amalfi," I felt a physical wave of nausea crash into my ribs. I couldn't just tell her what I had seen on that laptop. I knew my daughter. Chloe was fiercely loyal, and right now her loyalty belonged entirely to the man wearing the perfectly tailored suits. If I went to her with nothing but a frantic story about a snooping mother and a hidden computer file, Julian would swat my accusations away like a mild annoyance. I needed hard, undeniable proof. I printed the casting profile of Marcus Thorne. I compiled bank statements I had managed to pull from Chloe's joint account, showing the exact $500 Venmo transfer to a M. Thorne on the night of the engagement party, labeled with a deceptive memo, Vintage Wine Crate. I wrote down every column, every bullet point I had memorized from his Project C Notion board, recreating the architectural blueprint of my daughter's psychological prison. I placed everything into a thick manila folder. It felt heavy in my hands. It felt like a bomb. I texted Chloe on Saturday morning. "Honey, can you come over to the house around noon? I need to talk to you about something important. Just us." She replied 20 minutes later. "Sure, Mom. See you then." I spent the next 2 hours pacing the hardwood floors of my living room. I made a pot of chamomile tea I didn't drink. I arranged the throw pillows. I rehearsed the words in my head, trying to find the exact pitch of voice that conveyed urgent truth without sounding hysterical. "Chloe, you need to listen to me. The man you are marrying is not who he says he is." I practiced it to the empty room. It sounded hollow. At 12:15 p.m., I heard the familiar crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. I walked to the window, pulling back the sheer curtain. My breath caught in my throat. Chloe's white sedan was parked out front, but she wasn't alone. The passenger door opened and Julian stepped out. He was wearing a casual cream-colored knit sweater, looking effortlessly handsome in the crisp autumn air. He walked around the car, placed his hand on the small of Chloe's back, and leaned down to kiss her temple before they walked up the front steps together. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. "No, just us," I said. "Just us." The doorbell rang. I smoothed my trembling hands down the sides of my jeans, forced oxygen into my lungs, and opened the door. "Mom!" Chloe smiled, stepping in to hug me. She smelled of expensive vanilla perfume, a recent gift from him. "Sorry we're late. Julian and I were looking at tile samples for the new bathroom and we lost track of time. I know you said just us, but we share a car on the weekends now, so he just tagged along. Hope that's okay." "Elena," Julian said smoothly, stepping into the foyer. His smile was warm, perfectly calibrated. "I can wait in the living room and read a book if you two need girl talk. I don't want to intrude." "You are a parasite in my home," I thought. "Actually," I said, my voice sounding strangely loud in the quiet hallway. "It's good that you're here, Julian. We should all sit down." Julian's eyes flicked to mine. For a fraction of a second, so fast that anyone else would have missed it, the warmth in his gaze vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating flatline. He knew. He didn't know exactly what I had, but he knew the war had started. "Sounds serious," Chloe laughed nervously, taking off her coat. We moved into the living room. Chloe and Julian sat close together on the linen sofa. I sat across from them in the armchair, the manila folder resting on the coffee table between us. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a hammer against an anvil. "Mom, you're scaring me," Chloe said, her smile fading. "What's going on?" I didn't look at Julian. I kept my eyes locked on my daughter's face, the face I had memorized since she was a screaming infant in a cramped studio apartment. "Chloe, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I began, my voice trembling slightly before I forced it into iron. "I love you more than my own life. Everything I have ever done has been to protect you. And right now, you are in terrible danger." Chloe blinked, recoiling slightly. "Danger? Mom, what are you talking about?" I reached forward and flipped the manila folder open. "The night of your engagement party," I said, sliding the printed headshot across the glass table. "I overheard Marcus talking on the phone in the library. He was demanding his hourly rate. He is not Julian's college friend. He is an actor from a local casting agency. Julian hired him to play a part." Chloe looked down at the paper. She stared at Marcus's smiling face, the bolded text advertising his hourly corporate role-play rate. Her brow furrowed in utter confusion. "What?" she breathed. She looked from the paper to Julian. "Julian, what is this?" I didn't let him answer. I pushed the Venmo bank statement across the table. He paid him $500 that night. And it's not just Marcus. When I went to Julian's apartment on Thursday, he left his laptop open. I saw his files, Chloe. I saw a workspace document titled Project C. Mom, you snooped on his computer? Chloe's voice spiked with sudden sharp defensiveness. I saw a spreadsheet. I pushed on, my volume rising, desperation leaking into my tone. A spreadsheet detailing exactly how he was going to isolate you. He had action plans, Chloe. Plans to make you quit your job. Plans to make you doubt your friends. Plans to weaponize my past to make you hate me. He is manipulating your entire reality. I sat back, my chest heaving. The evidence was on the table. The truth was out in the open, raw and bleeding. I braced myself for Julian's anger. I expected him to shout, to deny it, to grab Chloe's arm and storm out of my house. But Julian didn't get angry. Instead, he let his shoulders slump. He looked down at the coffee table, his hands resting on his knees. And then, slowly, he covered his face with his hands. His breath hitched. A terrible, shuddering sound ripped from his throat. When he lowered his hands, his eyes were red, brimming with heavy, devastated tears. He looked at Chloe, his face a portrait of absolute, soul-crushing shame. I'm so sorry, he whispered, his voice cracking perfectly. I am so sorry, Chloe. Chloe froze. The defensiveness in her posture melted instantly into alarm. Julian? Julian, what is it? Is it true? The actor. Yes, he choked out, a tear spilling over his cheek. He swiped at it, looking like a little boy who had just been caught stealing bread. Marcus is an actor. I hired him. But why? Why? Chloe asked, her voice soft, reaching out to touch his knee. Because I was terrified, Julian said, his voice dropping to a raw, painful whisper. He refused to look at me, keeping his tear-filled eyes locked entirely on Chloe. You have to understand, Chloe. You come from this beautiful world. You have a mother who worships you, friends who adore you, a life filled with light. And I have nothing. He took a ragged breath. I never told you the truth about my childhood. My parents didn't just pass away. My father was a violent alcoholic. He beat me until I couldn't stand. I spent my teenage years bouncing between abusive foster homes. I have severe CPTSD. The thought of bringing my real past, my real broken life into your perfect world, it paralyzed me. I just wanted to give you the normal, happy fiancé you deserved. So I hired someone to play the family I never had. I was so ashamed. I am so ashamed. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. I was watching a masterclass in psychological warfare. He was weaving a tragic, bulletproof narrative in real time, using the exact trauma triggers that he knew would activate Chloe's savior complex. Oh my God, Julian, Chloe breathed, her eyes filling with tears. She slid closer to him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. Why didn't you tell me? I would never judge you for that. Stop it, I shouted, the panic finally breaking through my restraint. I stood up, pointing a shaking finger at him. He's lying, Chloe. It's a performance. What about the spreadsheet? What about the plan to isolate you? Julian buried his face in Chloe's neck, taking a deep, shuddering breath before pulling away. He looked up at me. The tears were still in his eyes, but behind them, buried deep in the pupil, was a spark of cold, victorious mockery. Elena, Julian said softly, his voice thick with sorrow. I know you struggle with boundaries. I know it's hard for you to let Chloe grow up. But I never, ever thought you would stoop this low. Stoop low? I gasped. I saw the files. Julian reached into the inside pocket of his sweater. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. His hands were remarkably steady for a man who was supposedly having an emotional breakdown. When you came to my apartment on Thursday, Julian said to Chloe, his voice gentle and wounded, Elena asked to use the restroom. After she left, I went to my home office to print out the gallery schedules, but the printer was already running. Elena must have accidentally connected her phone to my Wi-Fi network and hit print on a draft she was writing. He unfolded the paper and handed it to Chloe. I didn't want to show you this, baby. I was going to throw it away. I didn't want to break your heart. But she's forcing my hand. Chloe took the paper. I watched her eyes scan the page. I didn't know what it was, but I watched the blood drain completely from my daughter's face. Her lips parted in horror. Her hand began to shake violently. Chloe? I stepped forward. Chloe, what is that? She didn't look at me. She kept reading, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. It's an email draft, Julian supplied quietly, playing the reluctant messenger. Addressed to her therapist, Dr. Evans. Read it, Chloe whispered, her voice a hollow, terrifying sound. Chloe, whatever it is, he made it up, I pleaded, moving around the coffee table. Chloe stood up so violently that her knees knocked the coffee table, sending the manila folder sliding to the floor. She held the paper up, her eyes blazing with a mixture of disgust and absolute betrayal. You wrote this, she spat, her voice shaking with rage. You actually wrote this. She read it aloud. Dr. Evans, I am losing my mind. She is slipping away. He is taking her from me, just like everyone else has. She doesn't realize that she is nothing without me. I built her. I own her. I swear to God I will ruin his reputation. I will fabricate whatever I have to fabricate to destroy this wedding. I would rather see her miserable and living in my basement for the rest of her life than let some man take my little girl away from me. She is mine. I will do whatever it takes to break them. The room spun. The floor beneath my feet felt like it was dissolving. No, I gasped, stepping back as if physically struck. No, Chloe, I swear on my life, I have never written those words. He forged that. He created a fake email to make me look crazy. Mom, it has your exact email signature, Chloe screamed, tears of fury spilling down her face. It has the exact sign-off you use. In Blooming Grace, Elena. How would he know that? Because he's a psychopath, I yelled back, my composure completely shattered. He's been studying us. He's been studying me to frame me. Stop, Chloe put her hands over her ears. Just stop. God, Julian was right about you. He warned me weeks ago. He said you had empty nest syndrome. He said women who have babies at 17 form toxic enmeshed trauma bonds and can't handle it when their kids leave. Chloe, he is gaslighting you. He is feeding you those words. No, Mom, you are gaslighting me, she cried out. She grabbed her coat from the armchair, her movements erratic and frantic. You couldn't stand that I found someone who loves me. You couldn't stand that I was going to have a normal family, a life outside of this. This suffocating bubble you put me in. You hate that I don't need you anymore. Every word was a bullet. Every sentence was a meticulously planted seed that Julian had watered for 6 months, now blossoming into a toxic, impenetrable thicket between me and my child. Chloe, please, I begged, the tears finally coming, hot and blinding. I reached out to grab her arm. Please just look at the evidence. Don't let him do this to us. She yanked her arm away as if my touch burned her. Don't touch me, she whispered, her eyes wide with revulsion. You are sick, Mom. You need serious psychiatric help. I am changing the locks on my apartment. I don't want you calling me. I don't want you texting me. And you are officially uninvited from my wedding. She turned and walked toward the front door. Julian stood up slowly. He adjusted the cuffs of his sweater. As he walked past me, ensuring Chloe's back was turned, he paused. The mask of the weeping, traumatized victim vanished entirely. He leaned in, his mouth an inch from my ear. He smelled of peppermint and cold calculation. Checkmate, Elena, he whispered. He walked out the door, closing it softly behind him. I stood in the center of my living room. Through the window, I watched Chloe get into the passenger seat, burying her face in her hands, while Julian wrapped a comforting arm around her shoulders. The car backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the road. The silence in the house was absolute. It was the silence of a grave. I sank to my knees on the hardwood floor, surrounded by scattered pieces of paper. the useless truth that had cost me everything. I curled into myself, pressing my face into the rug, and let out a sound I didn't know a human throat could make. I had lost. The man with the fake friends and the forged emails had stolen my daughter, and he had made her lock the cage from the inside. Silence is not empty. It is heavy, dense, and suffocating. For the first 3 weeks after Chloe walked out of my house, the silence in my home became a physical entity. It sat with me at the kitchen island while my coffee went cold. It lay beside me in the dark, pressing down on my chest until I gasped for air. I left voicemails that went unanswered. I sent texts that turned from blue to a devastating blocked green. I drove by her apartment building twice, sitting in my car across the street, watching her living room window until the lights went out. I didn't knock. I knew that if I knocked, Julian would call the police, and the narrative of the unhinged, stalking mother he had meticulously crafted would be cemented in public record. My business began to bleed. At Elena's events, I stood in the middle of a walk-in cooler surrounded by thousands of imported white roses, and I felt absolutely nothing. A bride complained that the shade of the hydrangeas was slightly too blue, and I just stared at her, marveling at the luxury of having such a trivial problem. My assistant, Maria, started taking over my client meetings. She saw the hollowed-out look in my eyes and stopped asking questions. A mother's worst nightmare isn't watching her child die. It is watching her child look at her with absolute, unadulterated hatred. He had taken my daughter's mind, reprogrammed her memories, and weaponized my love against me. On the 22nd day of the estrangement, I was sitting on the floor of Chloe's childhood bedroom. I was holding a small silver music box I had bought for her 10th birthday. I wound the key, listening to the fragile, tinny melody of Swan Lake. "You survived raising a baby in a one-bedroom apartment with no heat," a voice inside me whispered. It sounded like my own mother, fierce and unforgiving. "You survived working 80-hour weeks. Are you going to let a man in a bespoke suit take your blood?" I closed the music box. The melody snapped off. I stood up. I walked into my home office, opened my laptop, and began to dig. If Julian had lied about his friends, his past, and his trauma, then his entire existence was a fabrication. And fabrications leave paper trails. You just have to know where to look. I didn't search for Julian. I searched for the gaps in his story. He claimed he grew up in foster care in Pennsylvania before moving to Boston for his gallery career. I spent 4 sleepless nights scouring obscure public databases, property records, and old gallery exhibition catalogs. I hired a freelance data scraper on the dark web. A risky move I justified with the clarity of a desperate parent. And then I found the anomaly. 5 years ago, before he arrived in Boston, a man named Julian Vance, not his current last name Hayes, was listed as a co-signer on a commercial lease for an art space in Chicago. The other co-signer was a woman named Sarah Miller. Sarah. At the engagement party, he had introduced a fake friend named Sarah. Narcissists are rarely creative. They steal fragments of their real victims to build their fake realities. It is a twisted inside joke they play with themselves. I dug into Sarah Miller. 3 years ago, she had filed for a restraining order against Julian Vance in Cook County, Illinois. The request was denied due to insufficient physical evidence. 2 months later, Sarah Miller dissolved her business, sold her condo, and vanished from all social media platforms. It took me another 48 hours and a hefty sum paid to a private investigator in Illinois to track down her current whereabouts. She hadn't left Chicago. She had just changed her name, her profession, and retreated into the shadows. The next morning, I boarded a 6 a.m. flight to O'Hare. The wind off Lake Michigan was brutal, biting through my wool coat as I stood across the street from a small independent bookstore in the Lincoln Square neighborhood. The sign read, "The Quiet Page." I watched through the frosted glass for 20 minutes before I finally pushed the heavy wooden door open. The bell chimed. The store smelled of old paper and Earl Grey tea. She was behind the counter, organizing a stack of hardcovers. The private investigator's photo hadn't done justice to the exhaustion in her face. Sarah, now going by Clara, looked to be in her early 30s, but she carried herself with the brittle caution of a woman decades older. She wore a thick, oversized cardigan and her dark hair was pulled into a severe knot. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, not making eye contact. I walked up to the counter. My heart was a drum in my throat. I placed both of my hands flat on the scarred wood of the counter. "My name is Elena," I said. My voice was quiet, steady, and devoid of any pleasantries. "My daughter Chloe is 21 years old. She is currently engaged to Julian." Sarah froze. The hardcover book she was holding slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a loud thud. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. Her eyes darted toward the door, then to the back room, like a trapped animal calculating an escape route. I don't know who that is," she stammered, stepping back, her hands trembling as they grasped the edge of the register. "You need to leave." "I know he used the name Vance when he was with you," I continued, refusing to move. "I know about the art space lease. I know about the restraining order the judge denied because he didn't leave bruises. And I know that right now, he is doing the exact same thing to my daughter." Sarah closed her eyes. A shudder violently racked her thin frame. "Please," I whispered, the iron in my voice breaking, revealing the shattered mother underneath. "Please, he took her from me. He forged emails to make her think I'm insane. She hates me. I have nothing left, and she is walking into a trap, and I don't know how to pull her out. I need your help." Sarah opened her eyes. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. She saw the dark circles under my eyes, the desperate grip of my hands on her counter. She saw the ghost of the woman she used to be. She flipped the closed sign on the front door and locked the deadbolt. We sat in the cramped break room in the back of the store, surrounded by stacks of unsold inventory and the hum of an old refrigerator. She poured me a cup of tea. Her hands were still shaking. "He doesn't hit you," Sarah said softly, staring into her mug. Her voice was hollow, stripped of emotion, echoing the clinical detachment of someone who had survived a war zone. That's what the judge didn't understand. If he hit me, I would have had proof. Julian is much, much smarter than that. "What does he do?" I asked, leaning in. "He dismantles you," she said, looking up at me. Her eyes were dark, endless wells of grief. "It starts so beautifully. He makes you feel like you are the center of the universe. He anticipates your needs before you even know them. He rescues you from minor inconveniences. And then, once you trust him completely, the isolation begins." I nodded slowly, remembering the Project C spreadsheet. "He isolates the target. He creates conflicts," Sarah continued, her voice gaining a shaky momentum. "He told me my best friend was secretly trying to sabotage my career. He showed me proof, text messages he had somehow spoofed. He told me my family thought I was a failure. Whenever I was upset, he was the only one there to comfort me. He became my entire world. He became the only source of truth. He forged an email to my daughter," I choked out, the memory still burning like acid. "He made it look like I was an obsessed, toxic mother trying to ruin her life." Sarah let out a bitter, knowing laugh. "Of course he did. He needs you out of the picture. Mothers are dangerous because mothers have instincts. He targets young women, bright, empathetic, usually with some kind of vulnerability or family wealth, and he systematically cuts off their limbs so they have no choice but to lean entirely on him." "But why?" I demanded, the sheer senselessness of it clawing at my sanity. "If it's not just for money, why?" "Power," Sarah whispered. "Complete godlike control. It's an addiction. He gets off on watching a strong, independent woman slowly turn into a paranoid, dependent shell who asks his permission to breathe. By the end of our relationship, I didn't know what day it was. I thought I was losing my mind. He convinced me I had early onset bipolar disorder. I was taking pills he gave me. A cold horror washed over me. I thought of Chloe, sitting in his immaculate apartment, drinking the coffee he made her, wearing his oversized sweater, completely cut off from the world. "How did you get out?" I asked. Sarah looked down at her hands. "I found a notebook in his car. He had been documenting my mental decline. He was planning to have me involuntarily committed, thereby gaining full legal conservatorship over my estate and my business." I realized that if I stayed, I was going to disappear completely. So I packed a bag while he was at the gallery. I left everything, my money, my career, my friends. I ran, and I didn't stop until I became Clara. She reached across the small table and grabbed my hand. Her grip was astonishingly strong. "Elena, you have to listen to me," she said, her eyes boring into mine with terrifying intensity. "If he marries your daughter, she is gone. The psychological abuse will escalate behind closed doors. He will break her mind until she doesn't remember who she is. You cannot let her sign a marriage license with that man." "I won't," I said, the tears finally falling, hot and fast down my cheeks. "But I don't know how to stop it. She won't talk to me. If I show up at the wedding, he'll have me arrested for trespassing. I have no leverage." Sarah was quiet for a long time. The hum of the refrigerator filled the heavy silence. I watched the gears turning behind her eyes, the conflict between her hard-won safety and the ghost of the woman she used to be. Slowly, she released my hand and stood up. She walked over to her locker in the corner of the break room, unlocked it, and pulled out a battered leather satchel. She set it on the table between us and unbuckled the straps. "When I ran," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "I didn't just take my clothes. I took the flash drive he kept hidden in his safe. I was too terrified to go to the police. They didn't believe me the first time, and I knew Julian would just spin it to make me look like a vengeful, crazy ex-fiancé stealing his property." She reached into the satchel and pulled out a small silver USB drive. She placed it on the table. It gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light. "What's on it?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Everything," Sarah said grimly. "His real financial records, the receipts for the actors he hires, the software he uses to spoof emails and text messages, and the journals, the digital logs of every woman he has done this to before me. Your daughter is not the second, Elena. She is the fourth." I stared at the silver drive. It was the Holy Grail. It was the key to unlocking my daughter's cage. "Why are you giving this to me now?" I asked, looking up at her. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She stood tall, her shoulders squared, shedding the persona of the frightened bookstore clerk. For a brief moment, I saw the fierce, successful woman she had been before Julian Vance destroyed her. "Because for 3 years I have lived in terror, looking over my shoulder every time a bell chimes in this store," Sarah said. "I let him win because I wanted to survive. But I'm tired of hiding. And no mother should have to watch her daughter be buried alive." She pushed the drive across the table. "Take it, Elena," she said. "Take it and go burn his goddamn theater to the ground." The hotel room in downtown Chicago smelled of industrial bleach and stale air conditioning. It was 2 a.m. The only light in the room came from the harsh blue glow of my laptop screen. I sat cross-legged on the unforgiving mattress, the silver USB drive plugged into the side of my machine. For the past 4 hours, I had been descending into the digital catacombs of a monster. Sarah hadn't exaggerated. Julian Vance, or whatever his real name was, didn't just destroy women. He cataloged his destruction with the meticulous, chilling precision of a serial killer collecting trophies. There were financial ledgers detailing the exact amounts he had siphoned from his previous victims, carefully hidden behind layers of shell companies. There were folders containing fake medical records, forged emails, and scripts. Literal scripts. I opened a document titled Deflection Tactics 5.3. It read like a corporate manual for psychological torture. If target questions whereabouts Arrow initiate silence protocol for 12 hours. Return with flowers and manufactured grief over dead childhood friend. Turn target suspicion into guilt. My stomach churned, a violent wave of nausea rising in my throat. I scrolled further. There was a subfolder named Chloe. I clicked it. My hands were shaking so badly, I double-clicked the trackpad by accident. It was a timeline. It detailed exactly how he had orchestrated the friction between Chloe and her best friend, Mia. It showed screenshots of the fake Instagram accounts he had used to send Mia harassing messages, framing them to look like they came from Chloe's IP address. He had engineered their falling out, brick by invisible brick. He was a ghost in the machine of her life. I closed the laptop, the screen going black. I had the weapon. I had the proof. All I needed was Sarah. If the two of us walked into a police station in Boston, two women from different states with identical stories and hard digital evidence, they would have to listen. They would have to issue an emergency injunction. I finally fell into a restless, nightmare-plagued sleep at 4 a.m. At 8 a.m., I was standing on the freezing pavement outside the Quiet Page bookstore, 2 cups of coffee in my hands. I was ready to book our flights. I was ready to go to war. But the lights inside the store were off. The open sign had been flipped to closed. A cold prickle of unease crawled up the back of my neck. I knocked on the heavy glass. Nothing. I cupped my hand against the window and peered inside. The register was open, the cash drawer completely empty. A stack of hardcovers had been knocked over on the floor, the pages splayed open like broken wings. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. It was an unknown number. "Sarah?" I answered, my voice sharp in the biting wind. A ragged, hyperventilating sound came through the speaker. It was the sound of a woman drowning in dry air. "Elena," Sarah gasped. Her voice was barely recognizable, distorted by sheer, unadulterated terror. "You have to leave. You have to leave Chicago right now." "Sarah, what happened? Where are you?" I dropped the coffees. The paper cups burst on the pavement, brown liquid pooling around my boots. "He found me," she sobbed, a high-pitched, broken wail. "I don't know how, but he knows. He knows you were here. He knows I gave you the drive." "Did he hurt you? Did you call the police?" "The police can't stop a text message, Elena," she screamed, her voice cracking. 10 minutes ago, I received a text from an untraceable number. It wasn't a threat. It was a photograph." She choked on a sob, struggling to pull oxygen into her lungs. "It was a picture of my niece. She's 6 years old, Elena. She was standing at her bus stop in Evanston wearing her little yellow raincoat. The metadata on the photo. It was taken this morning. Someone was sitting in a car across the street from my sister's house, watching her." The blood drained from my face. The Chicago wind suddenly felt like ice water in my veins. He had eyes everywhere. He had money. He had reach. "Sarah, listen to me." "No, you listen to me," she cried hysterically. "I am packing my car. I am leaving the state. I told you, if I fought him, I would lose everything. I can't let him touch my family. I am so sorry about Chloe, Elena. I am so sorry. But you have to destroy that drive. If he knows you have it, he won't just ruin your reputation. He will kill you." "Sarah, please, you are my only witness. Without you, he'll just say I fabricated the drive." "I'm dead, Elena," she wept. "Sarah Miller is dead. Clara is dead. Do not look for me again." The line went dead. I stood on the sidewalk, the dial tone ringing in my ear like a flatlining heartbeat. I dialed the number back immediately. "We're sorry, the number you have reached has been disconnected." I was entirely alone. The flight back to Boston was a blur of silent agony. I stared out the airplane window at the blanket of white clouds, clutching my leather purse to my chest, feeling the hard edges of the USB drive through the fabric. It was useless. Everything Sarah had warned me about was true. If I took this drive to the Boston PD Cybercrimes Unit right now, it would sit in an evidence locker for 3 weeks waiting to be authenticated. Julian would be notified of the investigation. He would simply take Chloe, drain her accounts, and vanish to a non-extradition country before a detective even opened the first folder. And if I showed it to Chloe, she wouldn't believe it. Julian had already successfully branded me as a tech-savvy psychopath who forged emails to ruin her life. If I handed her a USB drive, he would just look at her with those sad, traumatized eyes and say, "Look how sick your mother is, baby. Look at the lengths she will go to." I arrived back at my empty house at 8 p.m. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark at my kitchen island, staring at the digital clock on the oven. 8:15, 8:45, 9:30. I was waiting for a miracle, but miracles don't visit houses where the silence is this loud. At 10:14 p.m., my cell phone rang. It startled me so badly I knocked a water glass off the counter. It shattered, but I ignored it, snatching the phone from the marble surface. The caller ID read Sylvia Rossi. Sylvia was a high-end bridal tailor on Newberry Street. We had worked together on dozens of luxury weddings. She was currently designing Chloe's custom silk gazar wedding gown. "Sylvia?" I answered, my voice rough from disuse. "Elena," Sylvia said. She was whispering. The background noise sounded like the inside of a car. "Elena, I am so sorry to call you this late. I know Chloe told me you were no longer involved in the wedding planning and I shouldn't be speaking to you." "Sylvia, what is it?" I demanded, the hairs on my arms standing up. "I'm sitting in my car outside the boutique," Sylvia breathed, her voice trembling. "Julian just left. He came to pick up the dress. He paid me $20,000 in cash to bypass the final fitting and take it tonight." "He picked up the dress? The wedding isn't for another month." "That's just it, Elena," Sylvia said, her words rushing out in a panicked stream. "He told me the venue in Napa had a fire. He said they didn't want to wait. He said they are going to the Suffolk County Courthouse tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to sign the papers and then flying directly to Paris for a month-long honeymoon." Tomorrow, 9 a.m. The room tilted on its axis. My heart slammed against my ribs with the force of a battering ram. He's accelerating the timeline. He knows I went to Chicago. He's closing the trap. "Sylvia, was Chloe with him?" I asked, my voice rising in panic. "She was in his car," Sylvia whispered, sounding like she was going to cry. "Elena, I walked the dress out to the trunk. I looked through the passenger window. Chloe looked heavily medicated. She was staring straight ahead, completely blank. And Elena..." "What? Sylvia, what?" While I was standing there, Julian opened her purse. He took her passport out, slipped it into his own jacket pocket, and locked the doors from his key fob before he smiled at me and tipped me. "Elena," he looked at me like a shark. "Something is very, very wrong." "Sylvia," I said, my voice suddenly dropping into a terrifyingly calm, dead register. "Thank you. You did the right thing." I hung up the phone. It was 10:22 p.m. I had exactly 10 hours and 38 minutes before my daughter signed away her legal rights, her finances, and her freedom to a sociopath. If they got on that plane to Paris, I would never see her again. He would consume her entirely. I looked at the shattered glass on the kitchen floor. I looked at the USB drive sitting on the counter. The police were too slow. Sarah was gone. My daughter hated me. I had absolutely zero leverage. Except I picked up the USB drive. I walked into my office, plugged it into my laptop, and opened the financial ledgers. I bypassed the horrific psychological scripts and went straight to the Venmo and wire transfer receipts. I found the payment to Marcus Thorne. $1,500 total. I found the payment to Sarah, the fake college friend. $1,200. I found the payments to the fake sailing couple. $2,000. I stared at the screen, the cold, calculating mind of a business owner overriding the panic of a mother. Julian had built his perfect reality using a very specific currency. Desperate, underpaid actors who didn't ask questions. His entire fortress was held together by mercenaries. And if there is one thing a woman who built $1 million event planning empire from scratch knows how to do, it is how to outbid the competition. I opened a new tab. I logged into my corporate banking portal. Elena's Events, LLC. Available balance, $142,560. It was the operational capital for the next 6 months. It was payroll. It was vendor deposits. It was my life's work. I didn't even blink. I initiated a massive overnight transfer to my personal checking account, ignoring the red warning flags flashing across the banking screen. Then I pulled up the casting profile I had printed days ago. I found the phone number for Marcus Thorne's talent agent. I didn't care what time it was. I dialed the number. It went to voicemail. I hung up. I pulled up the Venmo app on my phone, found the handle at MarcusThorne_actor, and sent a payment request for $1. In the memo line, I wrote, "This is Elena, Chloe's mother. I know Julian hired you. Answer your phone in 5 minutes or I send this entire transaction history to the Boston Globe and every casting director in New England." 4 minutes later, my phone lit up. An unknown Boston area code. I answered it. "Are you out of your mind?" Marcus hissed, his voice thick with sleep and panic. "Lady, it's 10:30 at night. I signed an NDA with that guy. Leave me alone." "Marcus," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as a scalpel, "Julian paid you $1,500 to lie to my daughter. I don't know what you're talking about." "I have the receipts, Marcus. I have the drive. I have everything." I cut him off smoothly. "I am not calling to threaten you. I am calling to hire you." Silence hung on the line. I could hear his rapid breathing. "What?" he finally whispered. "I am currently looking at my bank account," I said, pulling up my balance on the screen. "I have over $100,000 in liquid cash. Julian bought your loyalty for $1,500. I am offering you $20,000. I heard him choke on his own saliva. "To 20,000? $20,000, I repeated, enunciating every syllable. "Tax-free, cashier's check handed directly to you tomorrow morning, but you have to do exactly what I say, and you have to bring the others, the fake Sarah, the fake sailing couple. I will pay every single one of them $20,000. "Lady, you're crazy. He's going to kill us. The guy is a psycho." "He's a psycho with a maxed-out credit limit," I countered ruthlessly. "I am a mother with nothing to lose. I promise you, Marcus, I am vastly more dangerous than he is right now. Do you want the money or not?" The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. The digital clock rolled over to 10:45 p.m. What do you need us to do?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking. I looked out my office window into the pitch-black night. The tears were gone. The fear was gone. I felt a terrifying, absolute clarity settling over my bones. "Tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m., I said, my voice dropping to a dead whisper. "I need you to meet me at the front steps of the Suffolk County Courthouse, and we are going to put on a show." The granite steps of the Suffolk County Courthouse were freezing under the gray morning sky. It was 8:30 a.m. The wind whipping off the harbor carried the bitter promise of winter, but I couldn't feel the cold. I stood in the shadow of the massive stone pillars, clutching my leather purse. Inside it lay 4 cashier's checks, each written for exactly $20,000. $80,000, my business's survival, my life's savings, and I would have burned every single penny of it twice over to buy back my daughter. "I still think this is insane," a nervous voice muttered to my right. I didn't turn my head. Marcus was standing a few feet away, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Beside him stood the 3 other actors Julian had hired for the engagement party, the fake Sarah, whose real name was Jessica, and the sailing couple, 2 theater majors from Emerson College. They looked pale, jittery, and intensely uncomfortable. "You don't have to think it's sane, Marcus," I said, my voice as hard and flat as the concrete beneath our feet. "You just have to stand exactly where I tell you to stand, and you have to speak the truth. You do that, and you walk away with enough money to pay off your student loans today." I opened my purse and handed each of them a thick sealed envelope. They took them quickly, slipping them into their coats like thieves. At 8:47 a.m., a black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb. My breath caught in my throat. My heart slammed against my ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. Julian stepped out of the driver's side. He looked immaculate. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and a long wool overcoat, his hair perfectly styled. He walked around the front of the vehicle and opened the passenger door. Chloe stepped out. Seeing her felt like taking a physical blow to the stomach. Sylvia, the tailor, had been right. Chloe didn't look like a bride. She looked like a ghost. She was wearing a simple white sheath dress, but it hung loosely on her frame. Her face was completely devoid of makeup, her skin ashen, and her eyes were dark, vacant, and terrifyingly unfocused. She moved with the slow, mechanical compliance of someone who had been heavily medicated, or completely psychologically broken. Julian wrapped his arm tightly around her waist, practically holding her upright. He leaned down, whispering something into her ear, and kissed her temple. To a stranger passing by, it looked like devotion. To me, it looked like a warden escorting a prisoner. They began walking up the steps. I stepped out from behind the pillar, blocking their path. Julian stopped dead. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. His eyes widened, and a flash of pure, venomous rage contorted his handsome features. But he was a master of his craft. Before Chloe could even register the shift, his face smoothed out into an expression of deep, tragic pity. "Elena," he sighed, pulling Chloe slightly behind him as if protecting her from a wild animal. "Please, I beg you, do not do this here. You are making a scene. Chloe is already incredibly stressed." Chloe looked up at me. Her eyes were dull, but a flicker of the old anger sparked in them. "Mom, what are you doing here? I told you I never wanted to see you again." Her words sliced through me, but I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. "I know what you told me, sweetheart," I said, my voice eerily calm, echoing off the stone walls of the courthouse. "And I am not here to stop you from getting married. I am just here to give you your wedding present." "Elena, I am going to call courthouse security," Julian warned, his voice taking on a hard, authoritative edge. He reached into his pocket for his phone. "You are harassing us." "Call them," I challenged, stepping closer. "Call the police, Julian, because I'd love for them to be here for this." I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers. From the shadows of the pillars, the 4 actors stepped forward. They formed a semicircle around us, blocking the path to the heavy glass doors of the courthouse. Julian's hand froze halfway into his coat pocket. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. His eyes darted from Marcus to Jessica to the college students. For the first time since I met him, Julian Vance had absolutely nothing to say. Chloe blinked, her medicated fog parting just enough for confusion to seep in. She looked at Marcus. "Marcus?" she whispered. What are you doing here? Julian said you were out of town." Marcus looked at the ground, unable to meet her eyes. Then he looked at the envelope bulging in his coat pocket, swallowed hard, and looked up. "I'm not Marcus," he said, his voice shaking. "My name is David. I'm a freelance actor. I've never been to Yale. I met him on a casting website 2 weeks before your engagement party." Chloe recoiled as if she had been burned. "What?" "I'm sorry, Chloe," Jessica, the fake Sarah, spoke up, her arms crossed defensively. "He paid me $1,000 to pretend we worked together. He gave us a 10-page script to memorize. Your mother is telling the truth." Chloe turned to Julian, her eyes wide with mounting horror. Julian, what are they talking about?" Panic, raw and ugly, finally seized Julian's face. The control was slipping from his fingers, and he scrambled violently to get it back. He grabbed Chloe's shoulders, turning her forcefully to face him. "Chloe, don't listen to them," he said, his voice rising in manufactured desperation. "Don't you see what's happening? Your mother paid them. Look at their pockets. She bribed them to come here and lie to you. She is completely insane. She is trying to ruin us." "He's right," I said loudly, stepping right up to them. Julian whipped his head toward me, shocked. Chloe stared at me, trembling. "He's right, Chloe," I repeated, holding her gaze. "I did pay them. I paid them $20,000 each to stand here today, because Julian built your reality with money, and the only way to tear it down was to outbid him." "You see?" Julian yelled, pointing a triumphant shaking finger at me. "She admits it. She's a psychopath. Chloe, let's go inside, right now." He yanked her arm, trying to drag her up the stairs. But Chloe planted her feet, staring at me. "Why, Mom?" she choked out, a tear finally cutting through the fog in her eyes. "Why would you do this?" "Because paying them was the only way to get him to stand still long enough for you to hear this," I said softly. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. It was synced to a small, powerful Bluetooth speaker clutched in my other hand. I opened the audio file I had extracted from the silver USB drive at 2 in the morning. the hidden recording Sarah had taken 3 years ago. I pressed play. The audio was slightly muffled, the sound of a phone hidden inside a purse, but the voice was unmistakable. It wasn't the warm, charming tone of the gallery director. It was a cold, dead, terrifying sneer. "You think anyone is going to believe you, Sarah?" Julian's recorded voice hissed out of the speaker, echoing across the courthouse steps. "Look at you. You're a mess. I own your reality. I isolated you because you are pathetic without me. Who are you going to call? I alienated your sister. I made your friends hate you. If you try to leave this apartment, I will have you committed to a psych ward by tomorrow morning, and I will drain every penny from your accounts. You are nothing. You are mine." I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the city traffic seemed to have stopped. Chloe stood frozen. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Julian's hand, which was still gripping her arm. Julian's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at the actors, he looked at me, and then he looked at the woman he thought he had completely broken. The charming, sophisticated illusion shattered into a million irreparable pieces, leaving nothing behind but a small, empty, cornered predator. "Chloe," Julian whispered, trying to reconstruct his face into a mask of pity. "Baby, that's a deep fake. She used AI. Your mother is sick." "Don't," Chloe said. It was a single word, but it held a terrifying amount of clarity. The fog of the sedatives was entirely burned away by the adrenaline of sheer survival. She looked at his hand on her arm, and then she looked up into his eyes. "Let go of me," she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute revulsion. Julian didn't let go. His fingers dug harder into her skin. "Chloe, you are not thinking clearly. We are going inside." "I said let go of me!" she screamed, violently yanking her arm out of his grasp and backing away from him. And then it happened. Narcissists can survive anything except public humiliation and the total loss of control. When the mask falls off and there is nowhere left to hide, the violence they keep buried inside violently erupts. Julian's face twisted into a snarl of pure, feral hatred. He didn't lunge at Chloe. He lunged at me. "You stupid bitch!" he roared, closing the distance between us in a fraction of a second. His hand shot out, grabbing the lapels of my coat, the force of his momentum slamming my back against the hard granite pillar. The air was knocked from my lungs. I saw his fist pull back, his eyes black with rage. But the blow never landed. Marcus, David, slammed into Julian from the side like a freight train. The two men crashed onto the concrete steps. Julian thrashed like a wild animal, screaming obscenities, but the two college students immediately jumped in, pinning his arms to the ground. "Hey, break it up! Get off him!" Two armed courthouse security guards came sprinting down the steps, their hands on their holsters. They took one look at the three men holding down a screaming, violently thrashing man in a bespoke suit, and immediately moved in to restrain Julian. I slid down the granite pillar, gasping for air, my heart hammering in my throat. "Mom!" Chloe dropped to her knees in front of me. She didn't care about the cold concrete. She didn't care about the white dress. She threw her arms around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder, and she broke. She sobbed with the terrifying, chest-heaving violence of a child who had been lost in the dark and suddenly found the light. Her tears soaked the collar of my coat. She clung to me as if I was the only solid thing left in the universe. "I'm sorry," she wailed, her fingers gripping the fabric of my coat so tightly her knuckles were white. "Oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I said such awful things to you. I hated you. I'm so sorry." I wrapped my arms around her trembling body, burying my face in her hair. I smelled the vanilla perfume mixed with the sweat of fear. I held her with the fierce, unbreakable grip of a woman who had gone to hell and back to retrieve her child. "I've got you," I cried, the tears I had held back for 6 months finally falling freely. "I've got you, my sweet girl. You're safe. I'm right here." A few yards away, the guards hauled Julian to his feet, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. He looked at us, his chest heaving, his perfect suit ruined and stained with courthouse dirt. He looked exactly like what he was. Nothing. 6 months later, the New England autumn returned, painting the trees in brilliant shades of amber and gold. The police investigation into Julian Vance, sparked by the USB drive I handed over to the detectives that very morning, opened a Pandora's box of financial fraud, extortion, and interstate stalking. He was denied bail. He won't be wearing a bespoke suit for a very, very long time. Chloe moved back into her childhood bedroom for 3 months. We didn't talk about it every day, but when the nightmares woke her up screaming, I was there. We went to therapy. We drank a lot of tea. Slowly, the color returned to her cheeks. She started laughing again. She went back to her marketing job, sharper, wiser, and carrying a quiet strength she didn't have before. If you are a parent reading this, or anyone who loves someone walking blindly into a commitment that feels slightly, inexplicably wrong, I want you to remember this. Your intuition is not paranoia. The quiet voice in the back of your head telling you that something is artificial is the most powerful weapon you possess. Do not ignore it because you want to be polite. Do not silence it because you are afraid of being called crazy. Real protection isn't about wrapping your children in bubble wrap and keeping them away from the world. Real protection is teaching them how to spot the wolves dressed in sheep's clothing. And when they are too blinded by the performance to see the teeth, real protection is being entirely willing to burn the theater down to get them out. My daughter survived because I refused to be polite, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat.